Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. We are coming to the end of July, which means it's book haul time. One of my favorite times of the month. This is a big one. I have, I think, 13 books to talk to you about that I hauled and brought into my library in the month of July. I have been trying to be a little bit more intentional about book purchasing and really think about what I am going to want in my library and get to at some point. But this month that went out a little bit, but I think there are good reasons why I got all of these books. Some of them are library builders, some of them I got really cheap, some of them were really great recommendations from a store I love, and we'll get around to all of that. Since there are 13 books to get through, we should probably jump right in so we can get to all of them. Let's start with two books I bought Pride weekend in Helena, Montana. And if I was in Helena, Montana, you know I went to Montana Book Company. So both of them were recommendations that came from Chelsea, who is one of the co-owners of that store. So thank you, Chelsea, for these first two recommendations. The first one is After Francesco by Brian Malloy. This is published by John Sconomilio Books, which is a division of Kensington. I went into Montana Book Company on the Saturday of Pride specifically wanting to seek out this book because Chelsea had posted about it on Instagram, and I was very intrigued about what she said about it in that post. I believe, if I remember right, she described it as one of the most honest representations of what life was like on the ground during the AIDS crisis, and I have a particular fascination with that time period. I am naturally, therefore, fascinated by the idea of reading this book. It follows a man who is grieving the loss of his lover, who was Francesco, and he is struggling. Ultimately, I believe he goes back to Minnesota where his family is. So there are shades of The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles from here. I feel like in my mind, I might end up comparing this book to The Prettiest Star, which probably wouldn't be good for either book. But I'm still really interested in this. It is supposed to be furious and funny and raw and probably a little bit sad, so I am looking forward to it as much as you can look forward to something that is probably going to be a sucker punch of emotion, but there you go. In my book hauls, I usually try to read the opening sentence or the opening paragraph, just a little bit of the opening of the book to try to give you a sense of what the book is about, because one of my favorite things to do when I get a new book is read the description, admire the cover, and always read the first sentence. So it's what I like to do with a new book, so I'm trying to bring you into my ritual. Chapter 1, January 1988, The End of the World. Aunt Nora always says that people can still surprise you. Take today's funeral, for example. The organist was playing Ave Maria, and I was thinking about how taut Brian Boitano's ass looked during the last World Championships when Live Eddie, my gay best friend and surviving partner of Dead Eddie, the guy in the casket, walked all the way up to the altar and demanded to be seated in the front row next to the coffin right alongside Dead Eddie's family. So right off the bat, we have some drama, we have some humor. It's tinged with a little bit of sadness because this is a funeral and somebody has lost their lover, and clearly he has not been permitted to sit with the family, which was extremely common and is still probably common. So that spikes my interest in this. I have some other things I need to get to in August, so I don't know if I'm going to get to it then, but I really want to get to this sometime soon. It's After Francesco by Brian Malloy. And the other book I got from Montana Book Company during Pride is Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian. This is published by Balzer and Bray. As Chelsea was describing this book to me, I started getting vibes of the TV show It's a Sin, which is on HBO Max. And by the way, if you have not watched It's a Sin on HBO Max, I recommend you do that as soon as you possibly can. Just make sure you have a box of tissues on hand in case you start to cry. Like a Love Story follows three teenagers in New York City in 1989. Reza is terrified that his Iranian family is going to find out that he is gay. Judy starts to date Reza and also spends a lot of time with her uncle, who is an activist with ACT UP. And Art is an out and proud teenager documenting the AIDS crisis through photography. Naturally, love triangle complications ensue against a backdrop of coming of age and surviving during the AIDS crisis. I am really looking forward to reading this as well. I really loved It's a Sin, and again, this is a topic that is particularly near and dear to my interests and my heart, so I am hoping I will be able to get to this book very soon. Let's do the opening, and it is a Stonewall Honor book. I forgot to mention that. I have had good luck with Stonewall Honor books in the past, so that is sort of another mark in its favor. Chapter 1, Reza. There should be a limit on how long any human being has to wear braces. Also, there should be another name for braces. Mouth invaders, maybe, or teeth terrorists. Although I suppose an Iranian boy these days shouldn't even think the word terrorist, so I take that back. Maybe I should just call them friends. They've accompanied me as we moved from one country to another, but it's been 3 years now and I'm done. Tomorrow I start my senior year of high school in a new city. This is it. My last chance to not be invisible. That is Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian. Now we leave the books I got for Pride and go to Razorblade Tears, a novel by S.A. Crosby. This is published by Flatiron Books. I have heard great things about S.A. Crosby's previous book, which was called Blacktop Wasteland, and that got me primed to read him at some point. This book has now stepped in front of Blacktop Wasteland in terms of whatever priority I had to get around to reading him, and I snatched it up because it has an interesting LGBTQ angle. It is about two ex-con fathers, Ike and Buddy Lee, who team up for revenge after their sons are murdered. The LGBTQ twist on this story is that their sons were married to each other, and neither Ike nor Buddy Lee were okay with their sons being gay. So this book is a quest for revenge, but it's also about complicated father-son relationships. It's about redemption and two men who are trying to do better for their sons in death than they did in life, which I think sounds fascinating. S.A. Crosby also did an interview on the New York Times Book Review podcast where he talked about that dynamic and how he works as a writer, and also the element of race. One of the fathers is black, the other one is white, and the different ways they approach the world as a result of that, and the different ways in which the world approaches them, which also sounds really interesting and delicate. Let's do the opening of the book. Chapter 1. Ike tried to remember a time when men with badges coming to his door early in the morning brought anything other than heartache and misery. But try as he might, nothing came to mind. That is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Crosby. We have a little bit of a color scheme going on with the first three books, but we're going to start getting away from it really quickly. Although this one is kind of in the same color scheme as the first ones. Now, this one is interesting because if I had done the mid-year book freakout tag now, this would have been my choice for the prettiest book that I have acquired this year so far. But I didn't have it when I did the mid-year book freakout tag, so oh well. But I have it now. It's Scarlet's Sister Mary by Julia Peterkin, and this is a Franklin Library edition of it, which is, frankly, stunning. Look at those gilt pages, the beautiful leather-bound detail on it, the pattern which kind of shimmers in light. I love it. Basically, reading Gone with the Wind has gotten me all kinds of hyped up for my Pulitzer Prize project, but finding a copy of all of the books that have gotten a Pulitzer Prize can be really expensive. It can be kind of difficult. A lot of the older books have gone out of print, so you either need to hope that your library has a copy or that some good soul has put them up in an ebook or audio format on a subscription app. For instance, His Family by Ernest Poole is actually on Scribd because there's no copyright on that book, but it gets more complicated once you get into the ones that have copyrights. But long story short, you might have to hunt some of them down. Scarlet's Sister Mary is one of those books. I was originally looking for a copy of it last year and didn't do it because $50 is the cheapest copy that I could find last year. I fully nerded out when I started looking at all of the different Pulitzer Prize titles and started creating a spreadsheet of all of the fiction winners so I can keep track of which ones I own, which ones I've read, which ones I want to reread as part of my project, which ones are available at my library, which ones are available through a subscription app or something else, and which ones I need to track down elsewhere. There's a lot of other information in the spreadsheet because, like I said, I fully nerded out, but that is what sort of prompted me to get curious and look online to see if there were copies of a couple of the ones that were unavailable anywhere else. And I found a different one first but I'm too excited to talk about this edition of Scarlet's Sister Mary, so I'm going to talk about the one I got first last, if that makes sense. Let's just say waiting paid off because I found this edition of Scarlet's Sister Mary for $16, plus I think $3 in shipping. So $19 altogether got me this gorgeous edition of Scarlet's Sister Mary, which has illustrations as well on top of the leather-bound appearance on the outside and the gilt pages. I mean, look at this book. It has other illustrations throughout the book. Let me see if I can find one for you. And it's well put together, so I don't feel like I would damage the book by reading it. I do want to be careful about how much I handle it and whether or not I've washed my hands before I pick it up. Just in case, you have things on your fingers throughout the day. I actually washed my hands before doing this book haul just for this book. So I looked into it, and the Franklin Library is a division of the Franklin Mint, which used to do all of those collectible things. I think they shut down in 2000. But one of the collections that the Franklin Library did of fancy editions of books was based on books that had won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, which is perfect for my purposes. But anyway, getting to the actual book, Scarlet's Sister Mary is interesting to me because it was a source of controversy at the time of its publication because of the way it dealt with race and sexuality. And it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1929, I believe, which was several years before Gone with the Wind did. It is also interesting to me because of the place where it is set, which is the Gullah region of South Carolina. It follows Mary, who is torn between her desire to have good standing in her church and her desire to live a life of sin and pleasure. That gives me shades of My Beloved, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. However, I'm reasonably certain that The Secret Lives of Church Ladies would prove to be a much more nuanced portrait of women in that situation. But I'm also basing that on the fact that this is from 1928 and likely to be dated. It was published in 1928, but it won the Pulitzer in 1929. The Pulitzer always lags a year behind the actual publication of the book. Julia Peterkin sought to offer readers sympathetic and accurate portraits of Black characters, but it was the component of sexuality that made this book controversial and saw it frequently banned. In fact, it was the Pulitzer jury's second choice for the prize that year and was only offered to the advisory board when they demanded an alternative to the first choice, or at least another option. Their first choice was Victim and Victor by John Rathbone Oliver, and when Scarlet's Sister Mary won, the man who had chaired the jury resigned in protest. So this is a deeply controversial book and a deeply controversial Pulitzer Prize winner as well, and it is sort of a forgotten book, which makes it interesting to me. Now, let's do the opening of Scarlet's Sister Mary. Chapter 1. The Black people who live in the quarters at Blue Brook Plantation believe they are far the best Black people living on the whole neck, as they call that long, narrow, rich strip of land lying between the sea on one side and the river with its swamps and deserted rice fields on the other. It'll be interesting to get to this whenever I get to it. Now, I wish I had known about the Franklin Library when I ordered The Late George Apley by John Marquand, because after I found Scarlet's Sister Mary, I looked into it, and there are also affordable versions of The Late George Apley in that Franklin Library edition. So I could have had a matching set. But oh well. This edition was only $5, again, plus maybe $3 in shipping, so about $8, and I got an out-of-print Pulitzer Prize winner that is in really good condition, so I can't be sad about that. Now, part of what excites me about this project is the opportunity to read some forgotten classics that are off the beaten path from traditional reading lists. Scarlet's Sister Mary definitely falls into that category, and so does The Late George Apley by John Marquand. This is an epistolary novel and a satire of Boston society told through letters sent to or from the recently deceased patriarch of the title. I've actually heard good things about this one. There's been some positive online buzz about it. It is supposed to be a pretty funny book and hold up fairly well. So I am excited to get to this as well. And this actually won the Pulitzer Prize the year after Gone with the Wind. So we're still in that same basic time period. It is funny because there's a price written on the inside cover that says $1, and I paid $5, but that's fine. It's still a relatively cheap copy of a book that's in good condition, so I'm not going to be angry about it. Chapter 1, A Foreword and Apology. a necessary exposition of circumstances permitting to a certain incorrect liberty in the penning of this memoir. George William Apley was born in the house of his maternal grandfather, William Leeds Hancock, on the steeper part of Mount Vernon Street on Beacon Hill on January 25th, 1866. He died in his own house, which overlooks the Charles River Basin and the Esplanade on the water side of Beacon Street on December 13th, 1933. This was the frame in which his life moved, and the frame which will surround his portrait as a man. He once said of himself, "I am the sort of man I am because environment prevented my being anything else." It's an interesting beginning, and they talk about his life being framed, and there's literally a frame on the cover of the book, so that begins to make sense. I still wish I had the Franklin Library Edition version of this, but it's fine. Everything's fine. Now, speaking of Pulitzer winners, I got a copy of Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. This edition of it is published by Doubleday. I forgot to mention that the late George Apley is published by Back Bay Books. I believe they republished it in 2004 or 2005, and it has since gone out of print again. But anyway, this one is published by Doubleday. I listened to this one on audio several years ago, and I've always wanted a copy for myself. I also feel like I want to reread this book as part of my Pulitzer Prize project because a couple of people have referenced it and said that they did not like the ending. And I think I know what they're talking about when it comes to the ending. People, they don't want to talk about it too much on their channel because you don't want to give anything away. I think I know what they're talking about, and I actually think I liked what they didn't like. But so I'm curious to reread it again. Anyway, while we were in Helena, we were walking downtown and stumbled on a display of used hardcovers outside Aunt Bonnie's Books, which is a used bookstore not far from Montana Book Company. This was in a place of honor. It was staring me right in the face as we approached the display. The display was for a sale where you could buy 3 hardcovers for $1. So I told my husband Joel that we're going inside to find more hardcovers for the sale. And that's what we did. It's not a perfect edition. It's not in great condition, and the printing is a little off on the cover, but that's fine. It looks like it would still be readable if I chose to read it from this edition, and I can try to take good care of it. What is interesting about this book to me is the way it approaches family history as history, and the way it talks about history as something that is ultimately unknowable. And I thought that was really interesting, and I can't wait to get back to it. Now let's do the beginning of the book. Part 1, Grass Valley, Chapter 1. Now I believe they will leave me alone. Obviously, Rodman came up hoping to find evidence of my incompetence, though how an incompetent could have got his place renovated, moved his library up, and got himself transported to it without arousing the suspicion of his watchful children ought to be a hard one for Rodman to answer. I take some pride in the way I managed all that. And he went away this afternoon without a scrap of what he would call data. That's Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. So when we went inside to find 2 more hardcover books that were part of that sale where you can get 3 hardcovers for $1, I came across Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel, a novel in monthly installments with recipes, romances, and home remedies. That title would usually turn me away, but I've heard really great things about this book. It was summer reading at one of the borders that I worked at I think it was the high school in the area, and it always sounded interesting. I just never got around to reading it. Now, I'm gonna read the description from the inside flap because I feel like I couldn't possibly describe this book better than it does. The narrator's great aunt Tita is the youngest of 3 sisters born to Mama Elena, the tyrannical owner of the De La Garza Ranch. While still in her mother's womb, she wept so violently as her mother chopped onions that she caused Mama Elena to begin early labor, and Tita slipped out in the middle of the kitchen table amid the spices and fixings for noodle soup. This early encounter with food soon became a way of life, and Tita grew up to be a master chef. Each chapter of the novel begins with one of Tita's recipes and her careful instructions for preparation. There's a bit of magical realism, there's a bit of sort of fantasy and love and romance, things like that. Let me find one of the chapter beginnings. So here we go. March. Quail in rose petal sauce. And then on the next page, it has the ingredients here in this really pretty format. And then you have how to prepare it. And the preparation is where it actually gets into the chapter of the book, which is kind of interesting. Let's do the beginning. Chapter 1, January, Christmas rolls. There's your list of ingredients. Preparation. Take care to chop the onion fine. To keep from crying when you chop it, which is so annoying, I suggest you place a little bit on your head. The trouble with crying over an onion is that once the chopping gets you started and the tears begin to well up, the next thing you know, you just can't stop. I don't know whether that's ever happened to you, but I have to confess it's happened to me many times. Mama used to say it was because I was especially sensitive to onions, like my great aunt Tita. And that is Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. The final selection from that hardcover sale at that used bookstore was How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang. I consider myself lucky to have found this as part of that sale. I've heard so many good things about this book, and maybe this is the excuse I need to read it. I'm probably still likely to listen to this book on audio, but for less than $1, who cares? This was also longlisted for the Booker Prize. Set in the American West, it follows Lucy and Sam as they search for a place to give their father a proper burial. They are children, by the way, blending elements of Chinese myth to tell a revisionist immigrant fable, which sounds really interesting to me. This is published by Riverhead, and let's do the beginning of the book. Part 1, XX62. Gold. Ba dies in the night, prompting them to seek $2 silver. Sam's tapping an angry beat come morning, but Lucy, before they go, feels the need to speak. Silence weighs harder on her and pushes till she gives way. That is How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang. The next book might seem like a bit of an odd choice. It's Stronger. What Is It You're Fighting For by Gareth Thomas. This is actually the second memoir that he has written, but it's the first one that we have purchased. We were just kind of interested in what he says in it. Gareth Thomas is a former rugby player in the UK. The first memoir that he wrote was about coming out. This one is about the adversity that Gareth Thomas faced in his life and how he has lived with becoming HIV positive. He was a contestant on the celebrity edition of Britain's Best Home Cook, which is Mary Berry's new TV show that she has been doing since she left Bake Off. And my husband and I were just interested in learning more about him, and this seemed like an interesting place to go. It also has a blurb from His Royal Highness, Prince William, on the cover. This is published by Ebury Press, and we got a signed edition. And the beginning of this is Introduction to the End. It's a standard sexual health check. I enter the clinic, do a finger prick test where they take a small amount of blood and sit in my car while I wait for the results. I have gone through this routine several times before. Nothing to see here, just a normal occurrence. 20 minutes later, my phone rings. Time to go back in. No problem. Barely worth thinking about. Like drinking a cup of tea, having a slice of toasts. The medic's expression is exactly the same. She is not downcast, nor does she seem nervous. It appears just an everyday moment. I am already thinking about the rest of the day. In fact, in my head, I am halfway home. And then she says it. Your test has shown you are HIV positive. That is the beginning of Stronger by Gareth Thomas. We're cruising along here. The next one is Notes from a Young Black Chef by Kwame Onwuachi, published by Vintage. For this one, I am going to read the flap for you because, again, I don't think I can explain this any better than the flap does. Kwame was a contestant on Top Chef, and he was a guest judge on the most recent season, which was filmed during the pandemic. So they got a bunch of former contestants on the show to enter the bubble with the hosts and judges and have them be the rotating panel of guest judges. And we got to know him from that, but this book has always sounded really fascinating. Montana Book Company has a sort of bingo card that they are doing for reading this year, and one of the options is something that is food writing. This was what I had been planning to do for that. I may do Stanley Tucci's upcoming book instead, but I will likely do this anyway. So, by the time he was 27 years old, Kwame Onwuachi had opened and closed one of the most talked about restaurants in America. He had sold drugs in New York and been shipped off to rural Nigeria to learn respect. He had launched his own catering company with $20,000 made from selling candy on the subway and starred on Top Chef. Through it all, Onwuachi's love of food and cooking remained a constant, even when, as a young chef, he was forced to grapple with just how unwelcoming the food world can be for people of color. In this inspirational memoir about the intersection of race, fame, and food, he shares the remarkable story of his culinary coming of age, powerful, heartfelt, and shockingly honest account of chasing your dreams, even when they don't turn out as you expected. It sounds fascinating, am I right? Let's do the opening of this book, Chapter 1, Standing on Stories. The air is so warm in DC tonight, it still feels like summer. It's October. It should be night already, but the sun is taking her sweet time leaving the stage. It's just too beautiful a day to say goodbye. From where I stand on the 5th floor balcony of the brand new National Museum of African American History and Culture, the city spread below seems full of promise. and that is Notes from a Young Black Chef by Kwame Onwuachi. 3 more books to get through. Next is The Man with Night Sweats by Tom Gunn. This is published by FSG Classics. This is a poetry collection that was recommended by Jen the Librarian. My husband has actually already read it, and I would like to get to it, and this is another one where I am going to read the flap to you because I feel like I can't describe it any better than what's here. The Man with Night Sweats is a haunting depiction of a world ravaged by illness that is part elegy for those who have been lost and part evocation of the changes that await those who survive. It is also one of the few works of literature that have fully met both the aesthetic and the moral challenges that the AIDS epidemic poses. Gunn's quiet, restrained lines, which draw frankly from the great tradition of English lyric verse, respond to the harrowing realities of our world with a stupefying simplicity and directness. So I'm looking forward to this. It is only small. It is about 87 pages. Could probably read that in a single afternoon, so I'm looking forward to that. We found a used edition of it. Now, I don't know if it makes sense to read the opening of a collection of poetry, but let's just see. Okay, the first poem is called The Hug, so I love it already. It was your birthday. We had drunk and dined half of the night with our old friend who'd showed us in the end to a bed I reached in one drunk stride. Already, as I lay snug and drowsy with the wine dozed on one side. That is The Man with Night Sweats by Tom Gunn. The next one is Gay Bar, Why We Went Out by Jeremy Atherton Lynn. This is published by Little Brown and Company, and this is the first of 2 purchases that came from my most anticipated books of 2021 video. I will link that in the description box down below if you would like to check it out. This is also the first of 2 purchases that I made from bookshop.org as a form of protest against Prime Day. If you're unfamiliar, bookshop.org will donate a portion of your purchase to an independent bookstore. If you specify a specific independent bookstore, the money goes to them. If not, it goes into a pool for all of them. It is a fantastic resource. I would recommend checking it out. This is an example of me trying to be more intentional in book purchases, believe it or not, given the sheer volume of books that I brought into my library this month. But I waited to see if this book would become available at my library or through a subscription app or anything like that, and it didn't. So at a certain point, I decided that because I wanted to read it, I was going to need to get a copy for myself. And I could use that opportunity to support an independent bookstore and also support the author and the publisher, because I feel like when you make these purchases, it gives people the idea that they should maybe stock them or print more copies or promote it a little bit more. So I felt like it would be important for me to do that. This book is a cultural history of gay bars and queer spaces, and it also seeks to examine what the reduction in these spaces over time could mean for gay identity. So that could be very interesting. Let's do the opening of this book. Chapter 1, The Dark Walks, London. I am not going to read the opening of this book. So if you want to know what it is, you are going to have to pick up a copy for yourself. That's my little tease for Gay Bar, Why We Went Out by Jeremy Atherton Lynn. We end with There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura. This is the other book that came from my most anticipated books list, and it's the other book that I purchased from bookshop.org in order to protest Prime Day. Now, Kikuko Tsumura has won numerous literary prizes in Japan, but this is the first of her works to be translated into English, which makes it a prime candidate for Women in Translation Month, which is August. So I am kind of hoping maybe to get to this in August, which is why it was a little bit urgent that I get to it when it was never available through my library or a subscription app. The translator, by the way, is Polly Barton. It follows a woman who goes to an employment agency looking for a job close to her home, a job that requires little thinking and which ideally involves sitting in a chair. As she moves through different jobs, Tsumura explores what she is looking for and what is actually meaningful. And I believe it goes through several unexpected directions and detours. So I would like to try to get to this for Women in Translation Month. We'll see if I actually do. Now, as I mentioned, when I get a new book, I love to kind of love on the cover and look at the first sentence. So I have already looked at the first sentence of this one, and it's not super compelling. I want to warn you about that. Hopefully the book after gets better. But chapter 1 is The Surveillance Job. Both screens showed the same person. The footage on the left-hand screen dated from 2200 the previous night, and the footage on the right-hand screen from 2000 the night before that. In both, The person was wearing the exact same fleece jacket, so without the little date stamp in the corner, there would be no way of knowing that there was a day separating the two images. And it goes on from there. I've heard good things about it. I've heard good things about Kikuko Tsumura as an author, so I anticipate that it picks up from there, but it's definitely not the most exciting opening sentence I have ever read in a video. So that is how I made all of my book purchases and purchasing decisions in July. I would love to hear what you brought into your library in July, what you think of all the things I brought into my library in July. If you have recommendations, maybe think I should stay away from something, it's a little too late for that, but let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.